Hello and welcome to Tyranid Tabletop. My name is Chris and today we are looking at the Winged Tyranid Hive Tyrant. I have gone ahead and magnetized this so I have every weapon option available to me because why not? There's so many great variations and I don't want to stick with just one. So today I'm going to take you through how I went about magnetizing this model and then we're going to paint it up. Now I only had a loose idea of a paint scheme moving into this, so we're learning quite a lot as we go. So I got the Winged Tyranid Hive Tyrant from the Combat Patrol Premium set. This is the first one and it comes with a Dreadnought as well as the Hive Tyrant. So we got some really good clear instructions on how to get them both put together, as well as taking us through painting them. I'm going to be loosely following the paint guide that we've got here, using Wraithbone for the skin and Basecoats Burgundy for all the Carapace, but other than that I'm going to be putting my own little spin on it. So let's go ahead and show you how now I have magnetized the Hive Tyrant. The first step is to obviously build your Hive Tyrant without any weapons, and we can drill 2 holes in the armpits to fit the magnets in. Now unlike the magnets in the torso that can just be pressed straight in and so long as they're flush they're absolutely fine, we need to get a good angle on this because the magnet is going to sit within the arm socket, which is then going to make it stick out at a specific angle. So we need to decide how we want this to work, but we've also got to consider that as we move it, it's all going to sort of move around with it, and sometimes what looks good in one position will end up clashing as he raises his arm, for example. Now that we know the position we want our arm to be in, we need to go ahead and mark out where we're going to drill our hole. So to do this, I've gone ahead and put a dab of white paint on the end of a needle file, and I'm really gently covering only the magnet inside of that torso. Now we want to get our arm, line it up as best as we can, and then dot it against that paint. That way it's going to transfer the mark of exactly where you need to be putting your magnet. And speaking of magnets, I'm using the 3x2mm magnets that I bought to do the Warlord Titan with. These are a perfect size to fit on the Hive Tyrant weapons, and are more than strong enough to keep the weapons in position. So we're going to be using 2 drill bits. One is a really fine 1mm drill bit, the next one then is a 3mm. We're using the 1mm to start off with, as this is going to give us a really good little pilot hole so that then we can come in with the larger drill bit and make sure that we're drilling in the exact same position. Hole made, we can do a little test fit, but I don't want to push it in all the way just yet. That's because I need to check the polarity. Now, if you've magnetized before, there's nothing worse than getting your magnets all set up to realize that they're repelling each other instead of attracting. So to make sure that we have our attractive faces facing each other, I've gone ahead and put another white blob in the arm and then put the magnet on top of that. That way I know that side needs to be facing out, as that is what is going to be received by the magnet in the torso. Once the superglue has been left to dry, we then need to clean up any rough edges that have been left around that magnet just from when we were drilling. And there we have it, it really is just as simple as that, and now we've got a magnet that fits perfectly on there and is also movable for multiple different poses. Moving on then, we can start painting it. So I'm going to be base coating this with a light ghost grey by Vallejo. This will give us a much nicer, brighter undertone for when we come to do the Wraithbone over the top, opposed if we were to use a dark grey or even a black. This is just going to give us some extra brightness in that skin tone. Many coats later, I don't know what it is about Wraithbone through an airbrush, it just doesn't cover as well as with a regular brush. That's finally all coated, so let's move on now to Basecoats Burgundy and get all of the scales and armour done. Now, I went into this paint job only having a loose plan in mind, so there was quite a few mistakes I made along the way, things that were done in orders that sort of don't make too much sense, and I did have to go back over and repaint certain things in certain areas, but that is the beauty of learning, isn't it? So we now have all of this base coated and we're ready to move on and paint all the fleshy bits that we see in between things like the wrists, the elbows, and also moving up the arm we've got these little open sections as well. So for that, I am going to be base coating them all with Plague Brown by Vallejo. Now I'd quickly come on to realise that this is a very interesting colour to work with. But until then, I'm using an Artist Opus brush to get into all of these really tight little areas, and then I'm using a larger brush by Citadel just to get these wings done. A few coats of that later, and I'm really happy with this contrast and how this flesh is looking against the rest of the skin itself. Now this is sort of the first area that I noticed this plague brown acting a little bit weirdly. It gives really good coverage, but is also quite transparent by the same merit. This is something that I'm going to be able to use to my benefit later on, but it was kind of weird to start off with to experience it as I was moving on and getting everything sorted. So the next step is going to be giving this a wash in Reikland Fleshshade. So I mixed this in a ratio of about 5:1 in terms of Reikland Fleshshade to water. This turned out to be a bit of a strong mixture. It worked out well on the skin tone itself, but when it came to the fleshy parts, especially on the wings, it did have slight of an interesting reaction. It was way too thick, it pooled, and I ended up sort of creating a bit of a mess. Happy, however, with how the wash has dried on the skin. Next step was to dry brush this back then with Wraithbone over the top. This is giving us a really nice, chalky, organic skin look, as opposed to the sort of Games Workshop's very clean skin tone. I think that look is far too clean for these perfectly bred killing machines. Dry brush of the skin complete, and I am really happy with how this has turned out, but it has highlighted that I probably shouldn't have done the Bracknell Burgundy at this stage, as I am going to have to now go back over and paint some of those overspills. As well as that, we can see what I'm on about, whereby I am just not happy with how this wash has dried on the wings at all, and we're also going to have to come back in and add some of that definition of the plague brown back into those little rips in the skin. So, seeing as I was going to have to paint these wings back to plague brown again, I thought why not experiment with just putting a dry brush now of Wraithbone over the top, and this is what led me down an interesting path with these wings. This plague brown just reacts really weirdly when I say that it covers well, but it still has a lot of translucency to it. So what I've done at the moment is thinned down Reikland Fleshshade, and I've gone over the top of that highlight just to see now how this all reacts. And I'm actually starting to see a bit of a direction for this to go in. Now I need to fix all of these wash marks regardless, so I am going to have to repaint the wings, but this then opened up to these highlights that I've created with this dry brush staying underneath this plague brown and being able to shine through. Now unfortunately the camera didn't pick this up too well, but just by putting this base coat of the plague brown back down, we've retained some of that Reikland Fleshshade wash that I've got in the first instance, and then over the top we've still got some of that brightness. Repainting these did mean that I had to come back in with some Wraithbone and paint all of these skin parts back in, so I just applied a couple of really thin layers of that, built it up over time, and was able to retain that organic look that the wash achieved. With those parts filled back in, we can go and add a little bit more depth now back to these wings. Now I'm not going to make the same mistake that I did last time, and I'm going to more heavily dilute my Reikland Fleshshade. This time the mix was about 60-40 water to Reikland Fleshshade. This gave a really nice thin consistency that was able to spread over and get much better coverage than I had last time, and not pool, not detract too much from everything that we put down, but also sit nicely in the recesses and put a bit of that darkness back in. One of the other things the experiment told me is that Wraithbone is too bright of a highlight to go back over this plague brown. So Barbarian Flesh should be a bit more in the middle of the two, so I'm coming over with a very thin dry brush of this just to capture some of those highlights back. Skin and flesh tones complete, we can now go back and block in our Baraknar Burgundy. Next to get a base coat is all of these spikes and talons that we've got all over this beautiful creature. So I'm going to be base coating these out with Gore Red by Vallejo. This is a really nice, deep, strong red tone. Goes over really well, so I've just built up 2 coats over everything. Now that we've got all of our colours down, next let's move on and start highlighting all of these carapaces. I wasn't quite sure whether or not I wanted to dry brush these or do a whole sort of styration pattern on them, and of course because I am a glutton for punishment I chose to go down the styration pattern route. So I'm going to start off with this claw here as a little test piece. We are going to be building up 2 colours. First is going to be Thunderhawk Blue, then we are going to come over the top of that with a highlight of Bearing Blue. Now I haven't really done anything like this in the past before, so of course let's just do a test on the biggest Tyranid model that I have. Now my brush control starting off certainly was not brilliant at all, but this taught me quite a lot about how to get some really nice fine lines and just some general good articulation and brush control in general. So this has been a worthwhile endeavour, but my god was there a couple of moments where I had to go back and repaint over things. So here the Thunderhawk blue has gone down, and now I'm just coming over the top with that bearing blue highlight. Okie doke, test piece complete, and I am happy with how this has turned out. It's going to be interesting to get this done across the rest of the model, but I think there's nothing else to do but just make a start on it. Progress on this was a little bit slow to start off with, just as I was building my confidence and trying to get a pattern down with everything, coming at things from different angles and just trying to find out what worked best for me. One of the biggest things I found was paint consistency as well, and getting it just in that sweet spot where it's not too dry that you can't put it down, it's too wet then whereby you sort of can't get these fine lines. As well as that, one thing that I did find was quite helpful was to not try and get too much of a definitive point on my brush at all times. Sometimes having the end slightly splayed out enabled me to get some really nice organic looking scratches. And after a few hours work, here we have the result. I was a bit nervous to start off with, certainly never done anything like that before, but halfway through I really found a rhythm and was able to just smash this out. As I mentioned, it was really beneficial for just brush control and getting slightly better in general, so if that's something that you're wanting to work on, I would thoroughly recommend picking up a Tyranid model and trying to replicate something like this. You will definitely learn all about applying the right amount of pressure. That means then we can move on and do one of the last bits, which is to apply a Nuln Oil wash all over our gore red pieces, just to really bring down and darken them, ready for a couple of highlights to be built up. I'm using this straight out of the bottle, so there's no need to be thinning it. Now that it's dried, you can see it's given a really nice deep darkness to that red colour. We can start building up our highlights. The first is going to be blood red, followed then by orange fire. I'm using a more flat makeup brush as opposed to a circular dry brush here, just to really help capture all of those edges. We're starting off with the dry brush of the blood red. As soon as that's all been base coated down, we're coming over the top with that fire orange. The combination of these two colours over that Nuln Oiled red just gives a really nice gradual transition through all the colours. There's no sort of sharp transitions, but you still get a really nice vibrance from that fire orange right at the end. And here we have it, all of those red bits are now complete, so we can move on and start looking at the base. I'm going to be using my favourite technique now to get a good natural earthy look, and that's to be mixing 4 paints on the base all at the same time. We've got yellow, white, brown and black. Now the idea is that we just get a little bit white on our brush to start off with. We want to dab this all over in random areas but not entirely covering it. Then we're doing the same with yellow before coming in and mixing them both fully together with the brown and adding tiny little dabs of black here and there to really darken the colour. We want to be careful with how much black we put in because it becomes very overpowering. By mixing all of these colours together, and especially having that yellow in it, we can get a really nice tonal variation of mud. When that's dried, we're then picking out all of the rocks with a nice stonewall grey, as well as this little tank trap that we've got here in lead belcher. This is all looking a little bit too clean, however, so we're coming in with some slightly thinned down Nuln Oil just to bring all of these colours together and to add that final little bit of darkness and dirt. Now we can come over the top with our stonewall grey again, and we're just putting a very thin highlight all over the top, just so it looks like we've got some dust and gravel all over this soil. We also can't forget the little tank trap, so that had a little coat of Reikland Flesh Shade, and now I'm coming back over the top with a bright silver, just dabbing that on to look like scratches. With our base complete, we can finally finish this model off then by giving it the black rim that it deserves to really pop this base and to seal the deal that this model is now finished. And here we have the finished result. So I hope you guys liked this video. Thank you ever so much for sticking with me whilst I've done this. This has been a big experiment. I've been learning as I'm going along, but I now think I've got a direction for my Tyranid army. This has been a bit of an in-between video whilst I've been working on some Warlord Titan stuff in the background. Next video we are going to be working on the Mars beta pattern head. I've got that printed. I'm halfway through sorting that out and getting some lovely LEDs in it and making it glow just like we did on the Plasma Annihilator. So you don't have to wait too long for that. Now I'm going to wrap this video up and get back to work. Thank you all ever so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please drop a like down below and a comment. Let me know what you think. But most importantly, if you're not subscribed, make sure you are, because the next video, the Warlord Titan, is back.